Hello, and welcome to Mapping the College Audition. I am your host, Charlie Murphy, director of MTCA. That's Musical Theater College Auditions. Check us out at mtca.com. And today we've got L. Morgan Lee on the pod. For our newer listeners, in these artist exploration episodes, we aim to explore the paths to success that artists have forged and are still forging, and tease out how their theatrical training helped them to blaze that trail. L. Morgan is an awesome artist, and I was really excited to have her on the pod, not only for her general artistry, but also because I've had a few requests from parents of our trans and non-binary students to have a bit more representation on the podcast. They've asked me both for schools and artists, and as I'll talk about a little bit more in our takeaway, I think it's really important to try to have a diversity of perspectives, even within different identity groups. So you're not asking just like one or two people to speak for an entire community, all of which, of course, have different experiences. And the other interesting perspective that L. Morgan brings to the table is that of a UArts grad. I believe our very first one since that school was shut down. So interesting to get her perspective there as well. For our current seniors, if you're listening to this on episode drop day, we have two webinars for you this week. One on making your final decision, and then a bonus webinar about waiting on a wait list. So please do attend those if you can. Some really great information in there. I am recording this episode on April Fool's Day. This is the first one that my 3-year-old actually understood what was happening, and she had a blast telling all of us April Fools all day. Basically, she's just telling us something that isn't true and then saying April Fools after it and then laughing uproariously. Like she was saying, like, I don't want to go to this pool at all this summer. April Fools! It was amazing and awesome. And who would have thought I would ever enjoy April Fools again, which I generally think of as like kind of a stupid holiday. I feel like that's what young parenthood does to you. All the days that you thought you hated, like Valentine's Day and April Fools, they should become super fun. I'm going to add Halloween to that list. Don't come at me, Halloween truthers. I've never liked that holiday, but now I love it. So I don't know, maybe if you're feeling super stressed about the process, maybe play a belated April Fool's joke on a family member. Leo tries to play one on me like once every 2 or 3 years. He tries to play one, though he's yet to actually get me. But one of these days, maybe I'll forget, and maybe he'll actually get me. So I'm sending all of you some April Fool's love, some April love in general. And I hope you enjoy this interview with L. Morgan Lee. Well, we are so excited to be joined by L. Morgan Lee. L. Morgan has a BFA at the University of the Arts in Musical Theater. We'll certainly talk about the University of the Arts. She made history by becoming the first openly transgender performer to receive a Tony Award nomination for A Strange Loop. Also cool, exciting European tour of Jesus Christ Superstar, The Danish Girl in London. She's also about to host Maestra's Amplify 2025 alongside Kate Baldwin with some amazing guests, which we'll chat about today. Morgan, how are you doing? Welcome on the pod. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling all right. I guess you could say as all right as one is able to feel in the world that we are currently living in. So I'm finding the ways to find gratitude in the simplest of things, maybe the things that we take for granted, the fact that you wake up in the morning and you're able to have whatever your beverage is in the morning. Like these things are becoming more important and like bringing me sort of more joy than they would have before. So yeah,
well,
I try to find the light.
I love it. I'm excited to talk about the world of today for sure. But before we do that, before we talk too much about the world of today, I'd love to, if you could take me back a little bit. Take me back a little bit. I want to talk about the college journey for you. But even before we do that, can you give me like the 60-second catch up to like getting you to 16 years old or 17 or whatever you were when you first started thinking about going to college? What do we need to know about L. Morgan in terms of growing up to that point?
Oh, wow. The 60-second getting me to college.
Give me 90 seconds. There won't be a clock, you know.
Yeah. But the timer starts now. No, I've been singing and performing sort of my entire life. So even as a child, I was doing things. And so going through all the county choirs, state choirs, all these sorts of things. I did all that stuff. So The idea of performance was always there. My first high school, I went to two. My first high school was Duke Ellington School of the Arts, which is in Georgetown in the DC area. And so I was a classical voice major there, started the sort of, what does it look like to become a performer? I was in the show choir, which was the full on introduction to musical theater.
Uh-huh.
And then I left that school because I wanted to see what it was like to be at a quote unquote regular high school. I wanted to have
Mm-hmm.
homecoming and football teams and all that kind of stuff. So then I went to a school called Eleanor Roosevelt in Greenbelt, Maryland. And after that, college was coming, and it was like, where am I going to go? Being a slightly introverted only child, I went with the school where I knew people who were there that I knew were
Uh-huh.
extremely talented.
Uh-huh.
Some people I knew that were ahead of me at Ellington went to University of the Arts.
Yep.
And so I looked at their program and sent in a VHS tape, dating
Mm-mm.
myself.
Mm-mm. You don't
Sent
look like
in
VHS tape. You look like would not have been VHS. I would not have believed VHS tape. I didn't look up the age, but I wouldn't have guessed.
sent in my VHS tape. And it's interesting because I knew I wanted to major in musical theater, but I was being lazy and did not want to go through the whole doing monologues and dances. I
Uh-huh.
didn't do that, and I didn't want to go to the school. So I made a VHS tape of me singing 3 songs
Mm-hmm.
and sent it to the voice program.
Uh-huh.
And so I came into the school as a classical voice major. And then as soon as I got there, I pivoted to musical theater.
Smart pivot. I like it. But so you didn't do like an audition tour. This was like a school you picked, you got in, you go, I'm done.
I'm glad that things worked out the way they did. I did not do the tour. I didn't
Yeah.
even, I mean, I was not a good student. I did not do the research to find out, like, what are the schools that are great for musical theater?
I
If you want
listened
to
to
be
a
on
podcast
Broadway,
like
what is
this if
that?
you wanted to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I did not do any of that. I said
Yeah.
these people I thought were incredibly talented, and they went to UArts, so it's good enough for me. I'm going.
See, and the point is, it's just that easy, folks. You don't need to do all this research. You just need to go pick a random
I tell
school,
people,
send your tape in, and be done.
I tell people on a regular basis, never do as I did. Do as
Yep.
I say, not as I did.
Too much of advice said on this
Do the
spot that is that
tour.
way. Do the tour, no,
Do
but
the
no,
tour.
it's all fair. Can you talk about your journey as a trans artist at this point? You know, I want to talk about that, especially in the career world as well. But as I'm saying in the pre-show, we have a number of trans students who are in different places in their journey, and I think seeking
Sure.
kind of information of like, what is that scholastic experience going to be like? So I wonder, as you're auditioning, as you're going through the college process, where were you in that journey? And sort of, especially, I guess I'm interested in like how you were supported in those ways, or any resistance you felt, or anything that was difficult for you there.
Yeah, I mean, I think to some degree, my college experience was a bit privileged because I was not out. I was not in tune with my full self at that point, and I say privileged because the reality is teaching in the university setting now, I'm seeing getting ideas from more students about what that actually is, in
Yep.
addition to working and doing shows with people who are, gender expansive in some way and
Yep.
hearing their stories from school. So I say privileged because I didn't have to experience teachers not quote unquote understanding about who
Uh-huh.
I am. To them, they just sort of saw me as they saw me. However, the thing that was interesting about my college experience, my junior year in school in particular, all of the rep I got from all of my teachers that year was all female centered rep,
Uh-huh.
which I sort of was very, I was a little baffled, quite frankly, and was
Uh-huh.
wondering had they had some kind of conversation, because I knew what was going on in my own mind and how I felt,
Uh-huh.
but I had not shared that with anybody.
Uh-huh.
And in many ways, I'd sort of locked it away as like not being possible to be me in that way at that point,
Mhm.
because I didn't have examples of people to look
Right.
to where I could see like this is possible, you could do this. So for me, it was like, that's a crazy idea. Just don't even pursue that. Like, just find the ways to fly free when you can, and do a song here and there that like help you get things. And then my junior year of school came, and all of a sudden, all the music I was doing, all of the scene work I was doing, I was like, why are you all giving me this? But like to this
Mhm.
day, it was the best year of my entire college
Uh-huh.
experience. It was the year I felt like I actually didn't have to put on a version of a person to do the scene work. And I could actually just act and actually
Yeah.
just be involved in the moment. So I think it's for me, college was uh, as good as it could be.
Yeah.
I think that had I been more forthcoming about my thoughts, I'm not quite sure how school would have been then. I mean,
Uh-huh.
this was a ways away, so we were not having some of these conversations. I think
Yep.
today is very different.
Yep. Well, and I'm excited. I have some questions later on, both here about your experience professionally, but then also in the college world, teaching in the college world. But let's stick with your UArts experience. Tell me, what was the experience like? I'd love to hear kind of broadly of like what you felt like you learned in those 4 years. Were there any big shocking lessons, any big revelations? Sort of what was the UArts experience for you, especially as a musical theater major?
Yeah, I think that like one of the biggest takeaways from UArts was finding the things that make you you. I think
Mm-hmm.
that school did a really good job of not sort of hammering in the cookie cutter idea to people. We didn't have a whole lot of conversations about types and tropes, and it was more about finding like what you do and
Yep.
trying to like really nurture that and to develop that and to help you learn how to rehearse roles and things through that lens, through your
Yep.
sort of unique lens. And I think that was like to me the biggest gift taking away from the school. I could have took more advantage of the program. I skipped too many
Yep.
ballet classes.
Who couldn't
um,
have? I know who couldn't have squeezed more juice out of the ballet. Yep.
but I was very grateful for people having conversations, of course, coming in talking about the things that make me roll my eyes so much right now, which is these type conversations, because the reality is we literally all play every one of those types in our lives.
Yep.
It depending on who we are talking to, depending on whose lens we're looking through. We are in my life. I'm always the leading lady. There's always some love interest. That we play all those things every day. So
Yep.
sort of this idea that our business has created to tell you who should be telling what thing, I think is
Mm-hmm.
actually kind of ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, people did come and like chat with us about some of these things. So we had that idea, but I thought that it was great to be able to know going in when I was playing against that idea in a room. It
Yep.
gave me some sort of it gave me some kind of ownership in the space, which was really nice when I started auditioning.
Yep.
Because I knew if they were not seen, I knew if I walked in, they probably would think this. And so it was sort of me in the driver's seat to go, do I accept that or do I need to do something and
Get a
work?
perspective.
Do I need to
Yeah.
present work that makes them change their mind?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I love that. Well, talk to me about so the post graduation. Then, how did graduation go for you? How did navigating finding your first agent, finding any kind of representation, relationship with casting directors, those first few years of your career? What was the sort of launch into the business like for you?
Sure. My sophomore year in college, I had the idea to come to New York City and try to audition for something just to see kind of what the field would be like.
Brilliant. Yeah.
At that point, it was a tour of Smokey Joe's Cafe
Mm-hmm.
that Dave Clemens Casting was putting up, and it was a tour that Gladys Knight was going to be a part of at that point. So I was like, I'm going to go Smokey Joe's Cafe. There's a very, very specific vocal type for one of the tracks.
Yep.
And I was like, I'm going to go because I know I can sing all that track stuff. And I'll just see how a New York audition, what the experience is. I'm like, what, 19 at that point?
Yep.
So I like came up to New York City, uh, sang a song in the room. And the person behind the table, who at that point was Louis St. Louis,
Mm-hmm.
who was the music director for the show on Broadway. I did not realize that. He goes, "Why haven't we seen you for Broadway? Where have you been?" And I'm thinking, I was probably just being bored. Um, and so I got into this like really like my like first audition in the city.
Uh-huh.
Had castings give me a card and say, if you get any offers, please let me know immediately what those things are, and like we will be giving you a call. And I ended up getting into like the very final end of callbacks,
Uh-huh.
where we all had to sing in front of each other, which was a little bit awkward, but um I was one of the only ones in the room that could just sing the song and didn't have any like flub ups or anything, just because
Uh-huh.
range wise it was particular. And I knew going into that room that like, one of you will get cast, one of you will get an understudy track, and there may be a swing coming out of this group
Yep.
too. There were only like four of us in the room.
Yep.
So I got back home to Philadelphia at that point, made a phone call to the casting office,
Yep.
left a voicemail saying, "Hi, I just wanted to let you all know, like, I'm only 19 years old. I'm a sophomore in school. I don't know that this was my first audition. I didn't expect it to go like this.
Uh-huh.
So I'd like to pull myself from consideration. And I do want to finish school, and I hope I'm not burning
Yep.
any bridges," and hung it. They left me a voicemail right back saying, "You did not burn any bridges. We were wondering how old you were because you did look very young." Um, and they were like, if you were already doing that, then come back to us when you graduate and we'll see
Yep.
kind of what's going on.
Uh-huh.
So I'd already had a little bit of like taste of what New York City was. Graduation was fine. I got out. I moved to New York maybe a month later, if that long. I wanted to get to New York as soon as possible,
Yep.
because it was very common at UArts for a lot of people to start to say, I'm going to start in Philadelphia,
Philly, yep.
and then I will sort of segue over. And many people who say that just sort of end up in Philadelphia.
Yep.
And so I was like, I'm gonna go. I don't know. I don't have
Yep.
I don't have any real plans. I'm just gonna
Yep.
go. I have not enough money in my bank account. I'm just gonna show up and see what happens.
Classic plan.
So I got to New York City. My rent was paid for the first month. I had groceries. I actually moved in with one of the friends who I went to both high school and college with.
Uh-huh.
And got there, and like a month and a half later, I got a TheaterWorks tour.
Mm-hmm.
So I got my card and immediately sort of jumped in.
And this is, but with an agent, without an agent, how are you navigating
No
this
agent.
early on? No agent?
No
so
agent.
you going to open calls? Or you being like, I'm pounding the pavement. I'm giving you the classic story here.
I actually think for that particular audition, I dropped off a headshot at a call that I was not able to get seen for. Like, I think I went to their EPA situation, dropped a headshot off, and then I got an appointment. And so I showed up for the appointment at like 10 a.m. I got the call by noon that I gotten it. And it was like, boom, boom, boom. It was, I think my introduction to the city actually was very, I realize now that it was like very rare.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
Because I pretty much just worked as soon as I got here.
And then did you have to do something?
And then I made the decision. That I wanted to stay in New York because I did not have a house. I was like, I'm a Cancer, and I really needed a home base. And I did not have one. All my things were in storage, and I was like, I can't, like, all this running around is not helpful for me. I actually need to just stay put for a bit. And then everything stopped. And then the minute I said, I cannot tour, I cannot run around the country, I have to be in New York, everything slowed down. Then I got like a You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown in the city.
Yep. I love it. And did you have any great survival jobs or, different ways you had to pay the rent in New York City?
I mean, when I got here, the very first job I got was I was folding clothes at Gap for a month.
Heck yeah.
So I was happy to leave that. And then the next sort of survival job I did, my mom actually hipped me to, because this is something that they don't actually teach you in college, which now teaching in college is something that I'm like always trying to throw out to people, because I think it's crazy to have a 4-year degree and to not have more idea about the ways to survive once you get into the city. There's all these business of the arts classes, and for some reason, no one talks about these things. So I do think that my mom hipped me off to, she was like, you have a BFA, you're super computer savvy, you're easy to like communicate with on the phone, like you can be temping. And I was like, what is that? And so I went to a temp agency, took all the tests, and I start temping. Like that for me was my like sort of survival / I had a couple periods in the city where I was like, theater is really not it. I don't like this like struggling game. I just want to be able to like live in the city for a bit and actually breathe. And so temping was really helpful for that, because executive assistant jobs pay very well when you are able to do them and you got them. So,
and especially the beautiful thing about temping is you have the ability to then to go in and out of them. Like sometimes it's like, how do you start that secondary career, which you want to be a career, but then some people are like, but now it's taking off so much that I can't go take this tour, I can't go do this thing. It's like,
and that was always I got job offers while I was temping, and that was actually one of the hard things, is I kept saying no, because I was like, I'm an actor, I can't take this job.
Right.
And then I think I finally, after a while, was like, you know what? I've been doing like readings and like lots of developmental work kind of things. I'm not really interested in running around a whole lot at the moment. So I'm going to take this job that I'm being offered. Because that will also allow me to not have roommates, and I can get an apartment. I can have things set up. And then if something comes through, I also have PTO, I have like vacation days. And so I was able to it was like, if something came up that was worth it, quit.
Smart. So smart.
And so that's what I did.
Speaking of little readings and stuff, can we talk a little bit about the journey of Strange Loop? Of course, we have a special relationship with that show. We have two coaches, two John Michaels, in fact, who've been part of it. And we also had James Jackson on the pod a while back, just I think the show was closing at the time. What was that journey like for you? I know it was a long period of time of development and then sort of an unlikely off Broadway to Broadway journey. But what was
Yeah.
that experience for you with the show?
Yeah, it was wild. I mean, I was introduced to the whole world of A Strange Loop via this. Michael slid into my DMs on Facebook.
It's the
Um,
funniest way to book what eventually will be a Broadway show. Not a lot of people book a Broadway show from DMs.
literally a like DM saying, "I heard you. I was given your name by some colleagues, and I saw a video of you singing Part of Your World, a like sort of disco arrangement of Part of Your World that I
Uh-huh.
did." Um, and he was like, here's some information. Here's some versions of my music. Let me know if you're interested. We're doing a reading at this place called Musical Theater Factory. And just let me know. Check out the material first, though. And so
Yep.
I went and looked at the material and thought, like, this is very blunt. Some of the things being said in this are really not things that we say out loud in musical theater
Mm-hmm.
typically. And I think where I was at that point, it was exactly kind of what I was interested in.
Uh-huh.
Someone who was just being themselves, and a writer who had a really strong POV. And who was just being,
Yep.
and who was sort of unapologetically himself. So I was like, let's see what happens. Let's try it. So I jumped in, and
Yep.
the rest is history.
And you were with it basically through the whole journey then. You were with it through the years and the
At
different
least
iterations.
from
Yeah.
Musical Theater Factory on, yeah. So I
Yeah.
came in like 2014.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was
And
with it
Broadway
pretty
itself doesn't happen till when? 2020,
2022.
2022. Wow. That's that's a
Hmm.
lot. That's a lot of development. That's a lot of time with the show.
And
Yeah.
for me, I mean, if we're talking about like I also transitioned through the development of the
Uh-huh.
show. So the human who came into day one, you know, expressed very differently by the time we got to off Broadway.
So
Um,
interesting. And the show just morphed it with you.
I tried to leave the show.
Uh-huh.
And then before we went off Broadway, actually,
Uh-huh.
I tried to pull out because I realized that the room was not necessarily a room that I should be a part of. It was not
Uh-huh.
really my story to tell. And
Because the
so
room was specifically focused on the Black gay male
it
experience.
was a very like Black, gay, male centered room.
Yep.
And so I before that, I'd always sort of felt a little bit of a way, but like I could hide inside of my track. So
Yep.
I liked the fact that I could simply do what I did in the show and not have to explain anything or have to talk about it. I just got
Yep.
to just be.
Yep.
And so when I pulled out, they were like, let's hold up, like let's talk, because we've been
Yep.
talking about you behind your back. We should probably share what we've
Yep.
been talking about to you.
Yep.
And so we had a conversation, and after that conversation, I decided to stay and see sort of what um, the conversation was sort of about, like reach and like
Yeah.
it made the room, having me there also helped like make the room grow a bit more and sort of
Yes.
helped the focus of the room be broader than it had been and maybe potentially reach more people. And
Yeah.
so I think that was the intention of me staying, and that was sort of the work that was talked about being put in, and the
I
rest was
think
history.
successfully. I do. I mean, I do feel like the experience of watching the show. Then, yes, I think it is specifically about a Black gay male experience, but it also it made it feel, especially because all the characters are playing different genders at different times. It
Sure.
made it feel like more of a conversation along a gender spectrum and
Sure.
along sexuality spectrum. That we don't think of these things as completely binary, and so to be able to
Yeah.
open our minds to that of going, this is a gender experience that is not a binary one, I think was interesting as an audience member. I certainly got a lot of that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that the experience, I think that the production that was put up was actually certainly a binary experience.
Uh-huh.
Because my track is a woman, so I think
Right.
it was just I think it was very cut and dry. I think that the show itself does have room for a more varied sort of
Yes.
spectrum of gender and conversation. I think,
Yes.
yeah, but I think the production that was put up on Broadway was certainly, there were, 6 guys and a girl.
Yeah. I
Which
think.
I think it, and I think that's, at least that was certainly my intention in the like building of that track, was to
Yes.
make space for a woman where there was not space before. And quite frankly, dramaturgically, this person, Usher, would absolutely have a woman in
Yes.
his spectrum, in his mind somewhere.
Yes.
I do think that the material itself does allow space for more varied gender presentations and identities. But then that's just sort of really based around sort of who's leading the room and
Yes.
who is mounting the production.
It's so well said. And I think some of that also speaks to not only, of course, your literal transition in the 8 years you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
the development,
Mm-hmm.
but also like the way Broadway shows are developed often as conversations happen and change. I remember, my wife was in Jagged Little Pill at the time. And I was like, the experience of watching that show, which of course had its own trans conversation, which, you could say that separately, but I even just mean the political conversation generally. The experience of watching that show before 2020 and after 2020, just
Absolutely.
completely different. I'm like, but it's still the show that
Absolutely.
was it was trying to push a boundary at one edge. And now I'm like, you're on the other side of that edge now. Like this feels dated in a way that I'm like, of course, when it was written, it didn't necessarily feel that way, but you're writing the same show and you have the same characters. But yeah, it's
We
interesting to have those
evolve.
conversations as it evolves, as the world evolves.
Yeah. I do think that Michael, in particular, I think pre-pandemic in particular, sort of as Michael evolved, the piece also sort of shifted and kind of played a little bit. There were little changes I think made sort of as Michael's head expanded in a lot of ways. So I mean, I think after pandemic, different conversation. But beforehand, definitely, I think the world around us changed. So there's no way that the work couldn't. And if it didn't, it would be a problem.
Well, and it's also then it becomes at one point like, what are you writing? I mean, again, not to get too deep into this journey, but it's like, this seems like he was writing the show of like him in grad school at this experience. Or I don't know and then it's like, but do I write the show of me now as a full adult with my new experiences? Or do I stay true to this person who I was then? Like,
Well, and that's a conversation that I was having, I think, a lot during the Broadway run was, I think that it's like really important to see this. At least for me, if I was talking to people that I knew, it was like, I think it's important to see this as a piece that took place during a certain time.
Yes.
And it's specifically about, and I kept calling it a rage play because, a 25-year-old who is experiencing all of this discomfort and figuring himself out and dealing with rage in these ways, it would color how he sees both the world and the people around him. All of our characters were really just, the version of us through a rage-filled 25-year-old's eyes. So that is not to say that it's actually like the truest version of all those people. It's just, this is who Usher saw. I think if you view it specifically like this is because everyone wants to put on this sort of, it is the Black queer that it's like, no. This is Michael R. Jackson's. This is Michael R. Jackson's piece about this person named Usher who is having this time, because there's no way that, quite frankly, any piece is going to be able to take on the expectations of a full group.
Of course.
I think it's the specificity that made it what it was.
Yep. I was going to say, I just saw Liberation by Bess Wells, this play that's on Broadway right now, or actually off Broadway, I think, right now. And someone just asked me, like, oh, was it like so revolutionary? I've heard it's great. It's so revolutionary about women's liberation. And I was like, I'm not even sure it was about women's liberation. It's about this woman and her mother, like trying to get to know her mother. Like that's what it really, like that's the context of the play is these people are in a women's liberation movement. But we're really, I think not all plays, but I think many great plays are these personal stories at the end of it. This is a playwright who's writing about her experience, not everyone's experience.
The specificity is what makes it relatable, I think.
Yeah, I want to make sure before we throw it a break here that we talk a little bit about the UArts of it all. I mentioned at the beginning. So how closely did you follow that when, UArts, of course, for many of our listeners will know the quick dissolution of UArts, RIP. Yes. What was that? I mean, imagine a shock to you. You couldn't be something you expected.
It was a shock on like multiple levels because I got offered this alumni Silver Star Award situation that would have been given at the graduation. And I was doing a show at the time. So I was like, I'm not gonna be able to come accept it. So they were like, oh my God, don't worry about it. We will keep your name on the list. Believe me, we'll come back around. We can do it next year or the year after. And then I got offered a teaching position once a week there. So I was like really geared up. So like Monday of the week, I got offered the teaching position. And then Wednesday, the news came out.
At UArts. Oh, I didn't know that. You got offered a position at UArts.
I got offered a position at UArts to teach on Mondays, to teach the seniors. And I was like, this is kind of cool. I'll go down. Like, that's cool. Like, it's quick and quick and get to chat with them. And it's my old school, so that there's a tie to it. And
Yep.
Yeah, and then Wednesday,
Yep.
that news came out, and I was like, what do
Yep.
I do? I write a note and say, sorry, I
Yep.
guess this is not working because
They're
I
still
didn't
paying you though,
believe
right?
it. I didn't believe. I was
Yeah.
like, I'm gonna get that check though, right now, but no, but
Yeah.
I didn't believe
Sure.
that it was even happening.
Yeah.
Because that just seemed really crazy.
Yep. And
I think it came out of nowhere it came out of nowhere for all of us. I do
for
not
sure.
think it came out of nowhere from the people that were the powers that be.
The powers that be, the financial people, for sure. But I know a lot of the professors. We know a lot of people who worked there who were shocked.
No,
I
the
mean,
professors
had no
were
idea.
taken
Had no idea.
completely off
Yeah.
guard. Yeah.
Even if they had some inkling of like, oh, there's some issues, but it wasn't like this is about to be
It wasn't,
gone.
we are
The
going to
job's going to be gone
close.
tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wonder because we talk often about schools, and we especially do this sometimes with emerging programs of like there's kind of like the stocks of them of like, hey, if you grab this emerging program now, you're going to get its representation to some extent 10 years later. Do you feel that way? But of course, then the reverse of that of like, if you went to a program that's really prestigious and then it falls down a little bit, do you feel any of that as a UArts grad of like, oh, my school doesn't exist anymore? Like, obviously, you're not at the same place in your career where you're like, my degree is the most motivating thing for my getting in rooms. But so I guess what is that experience? I can't really imagine being like, my school's
I
gone.
do. It does feel like there's like a little bit of a hole. It feels like anybody could say they went to UArts now and no one could ever really check it out.
There's no records to check.
I have a BFA from University of the Arts. Absolutely.
That's a
Go
good
check.
trick. Any listeners who
can.
didn't go to school, yeah, you're a UArts grad. There you go. You got it. Yeah.
It does feel like weird to have that part like sort of almost erased.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess I've been out long enough that like it's a very small part of the history at this point.
It's different than if you were 2 years out or 3 years out.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've gotten back and forth with my college career in my head for many, many years now. So
Yep. All right. Well, let's take a little bit of a break, and we'll be back with Elle Morgan in a second to talk a little bit more about your career. All right, we're back with Elle Morgan Lee, history-making transactor. And I want to return to that question of your experience as a transactor encountering the business, especially I want to talk a little bit about it now. Maybe in that context, we talked about the 8 years of Strange Loop. I think, in those 8 years, what we went through as an industry in terms of the conversations we're having, the reckoning was happening, it feels like in 2020, obviously, it was a very public conversation both regarding race and gender, and I think other conversations as well, but especially those two were at the forefront. I wonder, like, where do you hear that conversation today? Does it feel like it's still happening similarly? Does it feel like we've made progress? Do you feel like we're backsliding? Especially just as our industry. I want to talk about the broader world at large, but as our industry, where do you see those conversations happening today?
It's interesting. I think that, if I'm being very candid, I think that conversations, oh god, that word even makes me roll my eyes now, but conversations are actively happening. I think we are at a place where people feel like, where many sort of movers and shakers feel like they've uncovered and done the work, and now things are moving smoothly and beautifully for this gender expansive community. The trouble being that the gender expansive community is not a part of those conversations or in the rooms to help them know what that work looks like or is. It's like someone taking on, quote unquote, the work without asking what that looks like.
Right. Like they're saying, we've heard you. I heard you.
And so there's a lot of people who are sort of doing work that they are getting pats on the back for that is like actually sometimes sort of offensive and harmful and like not really okay with the groups that they're getting pats on the back for representing. So it's a little tricky. And like, I do think that like there has always been work available by artists who are from those communities.
Sure.
That work itself is actually not being mined and taken care of and supported and nurtured. And so it's tricky for those of us who get opportunities to do developmental work on those kinds of projects. And then when you're brought into the room that's fancier, it's like, wait, this is what... Like, I just finished this reading of somebody who got no money, who was getting no support, who's getting no care, and it's the best play I've ever been a part of. And then I go into this room where all of the money is there and all the names are attached, and you all are all smiling at each other about this great thing that you've done. And it makes us very small people. It like really diminishes our experiences to the things that you know. And it's clear that those things are not things that you've actually talked to us about. You've been
Uh-huh.
watching on people's social media or something.
Uh-huh.
And so it's like it's a bit emptier than it seems like it is, I think, on the outside to people.
Yep.
And there's a lot of business of show going on.
Yes.
There's a lot of smiling in front of the curtain and sort of, presenting,
Look, we've done.
we're
Yeah.
here, when people make comments like Broadway, Broadway, we're here to speak to you, trans and non-binary youth. The Broadway community sees you.
Yeah.
I would always suggest that those young people reach out to trans and non-binary people.
Uh-huh. Yep. Well, and I do think you're speaking to a broader problem with Broadway. I think it's been present for a long time of just the level of
Absolutely.
commercialism of it. It's like it is rarely representing, even take identity out of the question. It's rarely representing the best work of what's going on in New York City. It's like the stuff that you go, how did that get picked up and not that? But why? Why is that? Why can we not? I mean, other than the answer, of course, being money. But it's like, why isn't the best stuff? Because, I mean, I think nobody who lives in New York would tell you the best work you're going to see is going to be on Broadway. I mean, there are great things on Broadway, but like that's not where the cutting edge stuff that you go, that blew my mind. That was amazing. Happens.
I think, and there's something about capitalism is what it is. So, people bank on the things that there's familiarity around, and sometimes even the pieces that are new in some ways, there's something at the core that is so familiar, and that's why they were put where they were. So like, I get like the risk factor is not present on Broadway because you know, it's expensive. I mean, it's like, upwards of $20 million to do a musical now, in terms of budget. So it's like, I think we just, and this message has been going since the beginning of time. It feels like it's like it would benefit us to look for people that want to see those new cutting edge things, to start looking a bit deeper into the trenches a bit and start looking off Broadway and off Broadway. The tricky part about those things is that they don't have the kind of budgets or money that's able to allow many actors to do them. And so it's like, it's risky for us on the acting side to take projects where we might not be able to pay our living expenses if we're doing this project. Quite frankly, when Strange Loop started, when we were off Broadway, our paychecks were not, great. We didn't, even on Broadway, we didn't make like tons and tons of money. We made more than some of us have ever made, but in comparison to the budgets on other projects, like, we certainly did not. Us doing the show off Broadway was our hearts and souls involved. We didn't think the thing was ever going to happen. So we took it and we jumped in, and a lot of us dealt with, quite frankly, a lot of financial things afterwards because it was a blow. We got, people were in the red and having to make up things. And that is something that in some ways you sign up for in this business. And that, going in that you might have some really difficult times. And so it's why it's important to, as we were talking about, to have those places that you can fall to that are survival jobs. I also at that point was taking headshots for people. I was doing photography as a side job. I think you have to find the ways to support yourself because, the struggling artist life is not cute.
Yep.
So
and
you gotta
even when you're working at Playwrights, you're like, that's not struggling, really. I mean, that's a great job. It's a huge, prestigious job.
Horizons,
But you're talking about John Michael backstage coaching, and you're taking headshots, and
but people are coaching, people taking headshots, and I remember I bumped into someone on the elevator. At that point, one of our producers, and she was like, "You're taking headshots during the run," and I was like, "Yes, I have to pay my rent." And I was like,
and I'm going to need this job also after the run
check
too.
It's like, unfortunately, our check is not able to pay my rent. And like, I do think that there have been conversations. The contracts keep changing sort of with the union. Like right now, that check at Playwrights is a bit better than it was then. This was before negotiations and things. So that check is a bit better now than it was. But, it's money is hard. And so and people aren't buying tickets the way they used to. So it's like, it's a really tricky business to navigate at the moment. For everyone. And even more obstacle in some instances when you are gender expansive in some way. And like, I'm pretty easy in terms of like what the ask is to cast. Like, I'm a woman who's living her life and I want to play roles that are written for women. Like, for me, it's not that deep. And yet our business, I think, has a way of making it deeper than it has to be. There's sometimes this idea, if it's like, oh, well, if we bring in Elle Morgan, oh, that's interesting. And that would be an alternate way of telling the story. Is it an alternate way? Because that person that just showed up off the street to watch this show might not think anything. Like, I
Right.
think that's the that's it's like
And
you
I
are
think
making it an alternate way, in a way that it actually isn't, and it doesn't. It reflects the conversations around our lives. You know, when I go to the grocery store whenever I go, it's not there's not a trans flag that falls out and people are shouting and screaming, "Here comes Black
yeah,
trans history maker El
yeah,
Morgan." Like, they're not saying that. They're
yeah,
going, "There's that Black lady that lives down the street. She's
for
getting a
sure.
bread." Like,
Yeah.
it's not that deep. And so I think being met by people who are expecting that it is actually takes away, like, um it takes away from the experience of, like, what you could have when you were in the room. It's like many of us are just trying to live our lives.
Yeah.
That's why this whole period we're living in right now in this world is crazy, because it's like very clear that these people are not actually talking to people who are trans or who are gender expansive.
For sure. No, you're talking about there's of course, we'll talk about the gross insensitivity that I think that happens in the broader world, but I think there's a sensitivity in the theater world, a fear of like, oh, if I bring Elle Morgan in for this role, does that mean then if I cast it with someone who's not trans, does that mean that I'm transphobic, or does that mean then for every production, for the future of all production? I think there's some of that fear too of
I've
people
encountered
just,
that.
yeah, that people are sensitive
I've
to.
definitely encountered the idea of, like, and the thing is, like, even with, like, for instance, with A Strange Loop, I was advocating for one of my covers to be a cis woman, because I
Uh-huh.
thought it was very important for people to see. For me personally, look, this is my own personal thing, so I can't put this on a creative team. This is my personal thing. I built a role in this project with the idea of putting something out there in the canon for
Yep.
women to be in. And
Yep.
another, not the only, clearly, an additional role in the canon where
Yep.
there was not a woman present before and she is now. And
Yep.
there is this idea that women who are trans are taking away from women and are
Mm-hmm.
taking from the room. I wanted to, like, be an example of, like, no, girl, I'm adding. I want there to be more space for all of us.
Yep.
This role is a woman, and so people that are comfortable playing women, and being people who are women and people who are comfortable playing women, if you're non-binary or whatever you sort of however you identify, this track is perhaps a way to, be affirming for you and allow space for you to breathe. And so but then, for instance, when the show was cast in London, the actress that played my track was a cis woman. And so when
Uh-huh.
I saw that, I was like, great,
Yep.
that's wonderful. There was a lot of hubbub
Yep.
about, like, why would there not be any trans people in the show? It's
Yep.
trans, thought one should be trans. And I was like, y'all, that's taking away. Nobody asked me.
Right.
Y'all are taking away from what we built. Like, we built a space where this can hold lots of things.
Right.
And there absolutely should have been a trans person in that cast. Beautiful. But there's no telling for what they had to play. There's no requirement.
Yep.
And so I think people just love to sort of jump to assumptions without actually, like, checking in and finding
Yep.
out, like, what does this look like? I think the company, there's been a version, I'll say, I'm not going to call people out. There's been a version of the show cast where they put a man in my track.
Uh-huh.
And that, to me, is wrong, because that
Uh-huh.
track is a woman.
Uh-huh.
And so I think that, like, in that way, that is not the right casting. And I guess they got wind of something being wrong with that casting, and they let that person go. And then they brought in someone else who was at that person, I think, was gender expansive in some way.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well,
but it's
and of
like,
course,
it's a bigger conversation.
well, and of course, it's not the entire gender expansive community does not feel the same way. I mean, there would be some people who would say,
Right.
"Hey, this role was played by a trans woman. There are so few roles that are specifically trans women. Don't take that part away from me." But versus someone else who says,
Yeah.
there of course are
and in those conversations, I say the woman who made the role and who originated is telling you that that role is meant for a woman. And
Yeah.
so if you are in the space and you disagree, have
Right.
your thoughts, honey. That's what art is about. Do
Yep.
your version. But the intention on this role was this.
Yep. Totally. Well, and how do you like it? Because it's one of the changes that I think I was thinking about as I was like, how has it changed since 2020 or 2018, if you want to start there? Like, one of the ways I think things have changed is in the ways that characters are described. So when you see a casting call now, you see all the different versions of able to play X, this character identifies
Able
X. How do you like that?
identifying,
Yeah, how do
female
you prefer that?
identifying.
Yeah.
Someone to play a woman. I was like, because that's what we're all doing. We're just playing.
Just
I'm
playing.
just playing a woman every day.
I mean, on some level, as actors, we are just playing. It is play.
I kind of wish they would just put pronouns.
Uh-huh.
That might make people even more
character's
uncomfortable.
pronouns.
The character's pronouns. The character uses she, her pronouns. Yeah. So then coming into the room, if you are someone who's like, I don't feel comfortable with that, then that's not the character that you should play.
Yep.
I do think that like that can be, unfortunately, because people are not, the productions that are being funded and supported are not, actively throwing out like these wonderful non-binary roles. So then those conversations do sometimes push out people who are non-binary and who are not comfortable using, either he, him, or she, or her pronouns. So I do think that like, I can say, sometimes I can be problematic, Auntie L. Morgan, and I will own it. I'm a little old school, and my
woman of a certain age, of course.
I'm a woman of a certain age.
VHS age, you've already told us.
So I do think that like, look, I can acknowledge that even in my feelings about certain things, that I have to like check myself too on this. How am I making space more difficult for people who are perhaps non-binary or somehow gender expansive? I totally get it. But I do think that like, rather than sort of trying to tack ourselves onto things, I want the conversations to be more about how can we build rooms where we are already included. And so like, I think like that, because there's this idea of like, we need a trans alphabet. Do we? Like, yes, the idea of a woman who is trans playing alphabet, absolutely. There are so many nuances, and that would make the role, it would give the role a lot of like beautiful depth, because someone who is trans knows what it feels like to be outside and to feel other in some way. But I think the idea of it is like, not just, it's not as simple as just popping us into a spot, because has the room been made available for us? Has the room been made safe for us? And I don't think that there really is such thing as a safe room, because there's always going to be something that makes people feel a little bit uncomfortable or somehow triggered. But like, how mindful has the room been created for you to be there? And then if it has not been prepped for you in that way, and you're walking into a space that has not been prepped, then when you start complaining about how violent and dangerous, and it's like, but you wanted to be there. Y'all were begging to be there. Yep. I have feelings about us begging to be a part of rooms that we were not considered in.
It's so true.
So like, I think it's just, it's setting ourselves up to potentially be disappointed.
Yeah. I'd say rooms and plays. To the point, your point of going, there are these brilliant new plays that are written. That was my experience of watching like Carousel. I was just like, can we get a new play? Like, this play just feels old now. You watch him like, Josh Henry's amazing, but I'm like, that's not what was written. And this play is just like, it's hard to like this man, regardless of who you cast in this role at this point. Now, of course,
and Carousel is one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite plays.
There you go. Okay, good. You loved it. You should. You're allowed to.
No. I didn't say I loved that one. I said I loved the play.
You love the play.
I love Carousel.
I love Shakespeare, so I'll be like, I want to fight for these plays, but then sometimes like, can we get a new play too, like about this exact experience?
Yes, actually, but it's also and something even about Carousel is like, look, these people. I think it's about like, with the casting, it's like, how conscious are we of who we're putting on stage? Because I do think that like, if you put people who are assumed white all together, and then you put these two bad guys who are the brown ones, like, we have to be aware of what the optics are too. Right. So like, you could have made this a world where that didn't stick out in that way, and you might not have had to deal with that.
Right. But it felt like a story on top of a story that you're trying to tell me. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, and then nobody addresses it. So
nobody talks about
it. So clearly, it's like not a part of the like production at all. So,
but it is. It's right there. Yeah, so true. Well, I'd love to talk a little bit now, especially bringing in your PACE experience now, teaching young students today. Especially when you talk about stuff like casting, but really also about, and you've mentioned safe space and some of these things. I kind of wonder, and because again, one of my goals, I want to talk about more of the trans experience and, just our students' experience of safety across the board. When we talk about college, is something parents are often worried about. I kind of wonder sometimes, and maybe because you have experience in both these worlds, of like, are we setting the students up for success with some of the ways in which I think colleges have these wonderful missions of safety now, especially they've really moved toward trying to protect the students, and an inclusivity with casting that I think is really laudable. And of course, I do think colleges have a greater responsibility to student safety than a professional production obviously would. But I'm saying, I guess I wonder, do you feel that delta between the college world and how students are treated with stuff like casting versus how you have experienced casting yourself? Or do you feel like the world is catching up and because in some ways, of course, college, it has led the world. College is making changes, has been some of the reasons the students graduate and demand changes. So I don't know that it's only a bad thing,
Yeah.
but I guess I wonder about that delta sometimes when I see these colleges with some really wonderful ways of casting, innovative ways of casting when it comes to gender. And then I don't necessarily see that reflected in the industry.
I think in both instances, we need more people who are actually experiencing those lives behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
So like we need more people who are gender expansive teaching and being a
Yep.
part of the conversations and directing the shows and building them, because I think college is just as political in the casting as the real world is.
Yep.
There's politics galore in college casting, and depending on what that school's sort of programs are, at Pace, for instance, there's a limited number of performances that happen.
Yep.
And I think I like calculated it to like roughly 40 students each year get to be a part of a musical.
Uh-huh.
40 kids is very small in a
Yep.
whole program. And so it's like if the casting is always going to be that sort of small and intimate, then like it's going to be very difficult um, to truly take the kind of risks and do the kind of exciting work that is possible unless you're specifically geared towards doing that.
Yep.
And so it really comes down to who's running the programs, who's directing, who's doing all the things. I do think that the real world in terms of casting is certainly, like you said, I think the real world is very behind the dial, but it's because a lot of the same people are putting together shows, or rather the shows that you get to see. The shows that are put out front, the shows that are top, first-rate productions, those are the ones where, a lot of the people who are sitting behind the table are the same people, or there are people who are new people who really just do the same things as those other people.
Yep.
And the reason why they get in, it's like, we have this new, young, gender, we have this new, I'm not going to be really problematic. I'm like, we have this new young person who just added a they pronoun to their, modicum of things. They're not non-binary, but they just added that they because they say, screw the system.
Yep.
And they are, they trained under this, 70-year-old producer who has been doing these same kinds of shows all their life. And this is the new it person. We're so excited for this person. And then the show is like the same show that person that was 70 put up too. But now this person is the new one. It's like, it's the room didn't change. You just found another version of yourself. And then that person happily had added a they pronoun. So now is like part of the new world. And it's like, I think that we've got to like, we've got to be a little more discerning about like what we are accrediting to people.
Uh-huh.
We have to be more discerning about sort of who is driving the lens, whose lens is this thing.
Yes.
Because I think the minute we start to do that, we'll also start to be more discerning about how we see projects. I just want people to be specific. Like same thing. If you want to cast an all-white production of a show, that is a choice.
The all-white color purple.
That's a different choice.
I'm joking.
But if you want to do a new musical and like your whole cast is all white, there's a lot of people who are looking at breakdowns and being like, what this is crazy. It's just all white. Not in 2025. We don't need an all white cast. I think we absolutely need some all white cast because white is also a choice. If we stop centering, whiteness as that is the center and everything else is other, then that's where the problem is. In my life, I am Black, so I'm centered. Being Blackness is centered in my life. So if it feels weird to walk into rooms where if I walk in the room, I'm automatically assumed that I'm there to play some role that's here to take care of you or help guide you or just help to like center your narrative and not mine. It's like, well, wait a minute, I have one of my own. Why can I never be a part of the conversation? So it's like, I think that's a big part of it, is that if we could actually start to look at the lens of the show, if the show is inclusive of all these people, who's telling the show? Who's the director? Who's the writer? Who is the team? Because this might be all Black people on stage doing a thing, but if that show is being told through a white lens, it's not a Black show in the way that you think it is.
Yeah,
I think those are things that like, if we were more observant, we would be able to see. And then if we can own that, to me, great. Just be honest, because then we can actually take the piece for what it is and like be excited about that and go, okay, great. Well, it would have been really interesting to see this, version of the show that wasn't. Look at Once on This Island. I
Mm-hmm.
love Once on This Island. I'm crazy about Once on This Island. It's a lot of Black people on stage, but who wrote the show? Who is often directing it? It's like not Black people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not our lens. It's like, but yet so many of us love it and feel connected to it, and part of that is because we don't see enough material where we are getting centered in the right ways. And so we're all very thirsty to be heard and to feel seen and to feel appreciated and considered. I would love if there was more work getting celebrated that actually was from the lenses of these people who are dying for like consideration, to
For
be
sure.
to be just to be, and that consideration is the best word I can use, because it's like even being thought of in the process makes a difference.
And how do you square these conversations? Because there's so many important conversations. Thank God, I kept saying, now I'm using that word just to bother you.
Now you're using it too.
It got me going. But especially then, like in the political world that we're in now in 2025, like, because it's like there's a level of conversation I think that happens in New York City, that happens in universities, that happens at the high level of art making. And then there's like the world of, election ads with Kamala's for they them, and and now Democrats who are running away from trans people and saying, oh yeah, I know, we totally agree, sorry, we'll stop talking about this, it's not an issue. Like, I guess, how do you feel, does that affect the way that you think of your artistry? I guess, do you feel like, hey, I now have a responsibility to show up in a different way and be present in a different way because of this? Or you mentioned there's a radical act of your own happiness, if I'm going to enjoy my coffee and screw you. Like, how do you sort of see the political, how does that impact your art, if it does?
That's interesting. I think it changes all the time, but I do want to say right off that it's interesting. I think the conversations that are happening, the best and deepest and richest versions of those conversations are not happening in the rooms that are the most supported. Those conversations are happening amongst the people who are creating the work and who are, I have the juiciest, sometimes most lovely and affirming conversations with artists when I'm in a room where nobody knows that person's name, nobody's ever heard of the work they've done, and we're sitting here looking at this piece that's exceptional and fantastic and is deep and rich and does all the things, and nobody's going to support it because it's not doing the things the way that people want to see those people. So there's a play called Circle of Hermaphroditos by a writer named Shirley Cook, for instance, that I think is like one of my favorite plays I've ever gotten to be in a part of. I've done a couple different readings. One of those readings was one that I sort of orchestrated, and with the help of Breaking the Binary, George Struss, they sort of got a room together of people to watch the play and to see like a reading of it. That piece to me did all the things that I would love to be doing, and also centered transness. And like, it was interesting because the response to the piece is almost like it's not as edgy as people expect for it to be. The piece feels like a classic Tennessee Williams, like classic American play, the same kind of play that keeps getting done over and over and over and over and again on Broadway, but through a lens that is not like any of those lenses whatsoever. And so in its just standing there, it is radical because it's expecting you to see these people as people. And also, dare I say, presenting these people in a way, and there's a moment in the show where they all have to portray themselves as they have to on the street, which is not the most affirmed version of themselves. And it's like, that scene is so ridiculous, and it's a funny scene, and it also shows like the masks that we have to put on every day on the street versus who we are in our homes. And I think, for instance, that play not getting the kind of attention that I believe that it deserves is really frustrating, because I see all these other projects that are just being praised and going through the mills of like, oh, this is Broadway bound or off Broadway bound. And I'm like, it's wild, because many of those pieces really say nothing about us.
Right. But they're not, this piece didn't hit the expected note of edginess, or the expected, oh, cool, that triggered the right, this is what a trans experience is. I feel seen and I feel pushed just the right amount in a way that's comfortable for me as an audience, or whatever. They're saying that lack was sort of what was missing from this, or potentially what you think people might have been looking for.
It's too not talked about enough. it's not a transition story. It's not a, it's not banging you over the head with this is what being trans in
Uh-huh.
2025 looks like to you and not us.
Yeah.
It's a lot of stuff that's just not, um, uh, I forget actually what your first question. Oh, how are the conversations?
Politics is what I asked. Which
Yeah,
was a
no,
terrible
yeah.
question.
It was. I mean, it was. No, it was. I was saying that some of the conversations that I have that are the richest and most interesting tend to be in the rooms that are not the most
Totally.
funded, and
Yeah.
so it's interesting because I think the rooms at the Broadway level are not all. The conversation is not always that nuanced. It's
Yeah.
a lot of times it's still very 101. It's
Yep.
still very like people having to be told that, well, this is a trans man and he's a man and
Yep.
he wants to play roles that are written for men. And at some point that conversation, like I'm at a point now where I'm kind of like, I'm not saying that anymore because that sounds fucking
Yep.
crazy. Like
Yep.
I feel nuts walking into a room having to be like, oh yeah, hi, nice to meet you. I'm El Morgan. Yeah, I'm here to look at Blanche and Streetcar. And
Yep.
no, actually, it's not an alternate route. No,
Yep.
I'm just looking at Blanche. Oh, so
Yep.
you want to play women? Yes, as I
Mhm.
would. Like, I'm not, like I don't understand why I need to
Yeah.
prove this to you. I think
And
I think that's sort of where I am. And I'm getting more and more there every day where it's just, I have nothing to prove to you. If you
that's
don't
not my
see
job.
me, then it's not my business. It's not
Yep.
my concern anymore. Because I've wasted too much time and stress on trying to like make sure that I can say this and do this the right way. It's like women don't do that. Like cis women are not trying to make you prove that they're women.
Yep.
They're getting into rooms having to try and make you prove that they can play the role. And at this point, I'm not even trying to make you. Am I right for this or not?
Right.
I'm gonna do the material in the room,
Yep.
and if this is something that works, amazing. If it doesn't, great. I will
Yep.
move on about my way. I think this idea that we have to just lay ourselves on a table and splay ourselves open is just really, it takes away all of our agency and all of our power and our like self-love. I think that our business can be a lot more of a beautiful place if we can just get back to the play.
For sure. I mean,
Just keep
but
it about the play.
that was some of the conversation about how does a political landscape affect that. Is that it feels like in some ways it's hard to have it's hard to have a joyous, nuanced relationship with some of these questions in a world where it feels like half the country is coming for you. We're coming for.
Well, we
and you
can't
say,
have the questions. So we can't have those questions because we don't exist.
Yeah.
Apparently.
So then the only conversation is like, I'm here, or I do exist, I have the right to exist, or yeah.
Well, it also just makes it all feel really like an episode of The Twilight Zone because you're watching people say that you don't exist, and yet here you are going
I'm
about your
100%
day to
sure that I
day.
do. I'm quite sure that I'm here.
I'm sure that I'm here paying bills. I mean, because if I don't have to pay taxes or
That
if
sounds
I can
great.
get out of all that, I mean, I'll be like you. I feel like that's what it feels like.
Yeah.
It just feels crazy.
Yeah, totally. I want to wrap up just for time here, but I'd love to wrap with a little bit of advice to young artists and maybe especially to parents of young artists, maybe a little bit of each or whatever, wherever you're inspired to go there. If you're talking to a young actor of any kind, but especially a young trans actor who's looking at pursuing this career at the college and professional level, what advice might you have for that actor? And then what advice might you have for the parent of that actor of like how they can best support their child?
Yeah, thank you. I immediately would give the advice to a young actor to be a sponge in every room that you possibly can be. To ferociously go after information and get to know the people that you are working with as much as you can because you don't know who you are if you don't know the people around you. I believe that like I learn more about myself only because of sitting with you for an hour or for 2 hours because I see another person's life and another person's way of being that helps to inform mine and how I fit into the world around me. So I think if our job is to recreate life and our job is to tell that in a truthful and believable way, then we should want to know as much as we can about everyone around us and learn as much as we can. I think for a young actor, I would say you never get there. You never stop learning. To always continue learning, and to when you feel like you've had enough, learn more and sit inside of that. And that's to any actor of any kind. I think to the parents in particular to the parents of gender expansive young people, love your child and let your child show you who they are. Let them tell you who they are. I think parents are so many parents, and I really enjoy getting to speak to parents of gender expansive young people, because what I see is so often just like this overwhelming amount of love for their child. And then there's that idea of, I don't understand. And so there's the, I don't know which way to go. And we're talking to this, counselor or this psychologist about things. We're talking to this therapist about these things. And I get to know your child, because I think that a lot of times, even in the therapy situation, therapists only know what they've seen and what they think works. If my child came to me at a very young age and said, Mom, I think I'm trans, I would say, okay, you are very young and I hear you. And what does that mean to you? And if you say, Mom, I think I'm a trans woman or a trans girl, I would say, okay, you think that you're a trans girl? Great. That's wonderful. What does that mean to you? What does that look like? And at that point, instead of me running and trying to do all these moves and making a checklist of the things I need to do, my first instinct actually would be like, now I'm going to let you see lots of trans women. I'm gonna introduce you, and we're gonna start looking up all of the different kinds of trans feminine people there are. I want you to see every different version of what that looks like, so that you can understand that these are people who are like you say that you are. And this is the range of what those people look like, how they sound, what their voices are, because part of the reason that you feel that you are one of these women or one of these girls is because something does not feel right. Am I right? Is that where that comes from? So I want to help you center people like you in the discovery of self, and not centering how much can you be like cis people. Because so I think that is not helpful to us at all. We have us having cis people as the center of our thing that we're always reaching toward is teaching us to reach towards something that we will never attain. How can you truly love yourself if you're always reaching for something that you can't be, instead of putting time and love into what you are?
I was going to say, it's so interesting. I feel like both of those pieces of advice really center on curiosity. You're asking the young actor to be curious, and you're asking the parent to go be curious about your child.
Be curious about your child. Yeah. And clear your judgment out of the way. Because clearly, I think that's the thing, is that's the hard part. And look, my mom, I am a woman of a certain age, and my mom still has her opinions about things that we talk about. And I find myself often saying, well, Mom, that's what you think, but I'm grown. So I didn't need to ask you for anything.
But even that advice works for actors too. Clear your judgment. I feel like I'm telling myself all the damn time. I'm always like, you know what? Oh, he's a villain. No, he's not the villain of this play. No. Like, it's like to be like, you can't. No, let's not judge him. He's going through his experience. Yeah. So
I think being curious is it's gonna always help you.
Always. I love it. Well, we know we can follow you at L. Morgan Lee. It was so fun getting to chat with you. Thank you so much for the time today.
Of course. Thank you.
Yes. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with L. Morgan. I sure did on my end. I love that we ended with that advice surrounding curiosity, since that's going to parlay into all three of the takeaways that I wrote down from this episode. I think my very favorite moment of the episode was L. Morgan saying, Auntie L has more to learn too. And I just feel like, don't we all? It really made me wish that in listening back, I'd had a more specific moment of modeling that listening to, or that listening and learning maybe. In general, as an interview, I strive to make it more about the guests, be they artists or faculty. But sometimes I do think it's appropriate to throw in some of my own personal opinions and stories in there when it feels appropriate. And, I just wished I'd had a more direct moment of kind of modeling my own vulnerability in these conversations, since I certainly feel that vulnerability. Often with the schools, I'm asking questions that I have a strong answer or opinion on already. But in so many of these conversations surrounding identity, I really do feel like it's my job to continue to listen and evolve my thinking. I definitely come from that era where we were taught things like, race is a construct, gender is a construct, this idea of like, we need to see through these things to find each other's inner humanity. It's a very like utopian and, many would say too too optimistic and kind of whitewashed point of view that was very popular in the late 90s, right? And it's hard for me not to default to those beliefs in both art and politics. But I do think important for me and for all of us to be able to listen to people whose experiences are different and try to understand their perspectives on these issues, even if they're very different from our own. And I think important, expanding on what I said a bit in the intro, just to listen to diverse perspectives, even within different identity groups. Certainly that's my goal on the pod, because not every person of a certain race or gender or ability or whatever it is going to have the same experience and perspective. So certainly I will try to follow that advice of staying curious and learning and trying to have as many different experiences on the podcast. I've said from the beginning, I don't want this podcast to be a how-to where I'm like showing you the roadmap to success, but for me to be able to try to facilitate conversations that illuminate the landscape and let you draw your own map, since that's not something I can do for you, right? That certainly is MTCA's philosophy. We can show you the work, show you what it is, we can give you the information, but we can't do it for you and we can't tell you exactly what to do. There needs to be some agency and some, choice on your end as well. And I think that leads me into that conversation about the level of safety in school, which may be a bit confusing for those still in high school if you haven't experienced what this means in college yet. I think there is a really active conversation, and some of it you've heard hinted at from different professors, about the level of safety. And I'm going to use the word safety, but of course you can use different words than safety here, but let's just use that as an umbrella term. But the level of safety that they're presenting to young artists, right? This was something that was really demanded strongly by students in reaction to some teaching practices that they felt were abusive, or maybe in some cases borderline abusive, right? And then now some students feel that pendulum has swung too far in other cases, and the faculty aren't pushing them enough artistically. I was talking about that in the context of casting practices, but really there are so many classroom practices where this conversation is currently happening. And like so many things, of course, there needs to be a balance. It's something Elizabeth and I talk about all the time when you talk about parenting. The kind of modern day practices of gentle parenting is kind of a reaction to some practices that people felt were abusive, or in some case, again, maybe it's borderline abusive. Some people might just say they were old school and maybe less evolved in the ways that they would nurture a child's development. For instance, like if you're making sort of behavior-based changes and teaching the kid to feel shame or to repress what they're feeling rather than teaching them how to deal with it, that's less ideal, I think, in modern day parenting. But of course, the flip side is in maybe the criticism of some version of gentle parenting, or what some might pejoratively call permissive parenting, what I've heard called Instagram parenting before, is that a child can't experience no obstacles in their life either, right? If they experience no obstacles whatsoever, how are they going to be able to form the grit necessary to be an adult person in this world? So obviously, these programs are not a child's parents. Obviously, you can tell I have a 3-year-old and now I view everything through the specific lens of parenting because I spend so much time thinking about it. But I do think there's a question that programs are wrestling with in terms of that level of safety. And you want to investigate this question as you're considering attending, is like, where are they in that conversation of that balance of safety? Have they, in your opinion, removed all obstacles entirely? Have they found their way into some version of a brave space or whatever you're calling it? And also it's worth considering, what balance is going to feel right for you. Most students that I meet in 2025 really talk about wanting to go to a school that doesn't feel toxic, that doesn't feel a certain kind of competitive. But then some students and parents do say, hey, I do want to go to school that has a bit of competition to try to push them to the next level, right? And I, of course, don't think there's a singular ideal, though, of course, there are better formulas in general when you talk about, trying to foster competition within the self as opposed to competition with your peers, right? Certainly, I think the former is better than the latter. But it can't be, on either extreme fully and lead to success, right? I don't think you can be completely have no obstacles whatsoever and no competition. I don't think you, of course, can have the most competitive, more abusive environment and have that be successful. And to bring it back to that conversation of casting practices, it has to be able to relate to some of the reality of what current practices are that are happening in the business too. I think it's laudable for colleges to continue to lead the industry. As we've talked about, they really have led the industry in the right direction in the past. And I think it's laudable to keep doing that. But there also has to be a blend of like, this is what we think is ideal. This is what we think should be happening and will be happening. And then also some amount of like, and here's some of what you're going to experience actually in the world today if you graduate in 2026. And I guess that just parlays me into that last advice, which I thought was so good from Al Morgan, of just being curious as a parent in general. Man, I wish with every experience my child has, I could just lean into that feeling of like, hey, tell me more about that. I mean, that's certainly my goal. What does that mean for you? Why are you asking me that question? What's underneath this moment that's happening, as opposed to dealing with the moment that's happening? It's so much easier said than done in all of these things, especially when you have strong opinions. But I do think it's just such good advice for parents in general. Whether you're talking about your child's ambition as an artist, their fears, their anxieties. I have just seen our MTCA parents be so successful when they're able to be curious and listen rather than try to lead with shaping their child and what action they should take. And for those who do want input in their child's life, which I'm sure many of you listening do, I do think it also really helps open the door for input. If you're able to get curious and really try to honestly understand what's behind a child's decision that you might disagree with, very often your leading with curiosity will then give space for your child to then ask for your thoughts on something in a way that they're going to be more receptive to it. It doesn't mean they'll definitely follow your advice in those cases, but they are much more likely to be receptive if you're able to lead with curiosity than if you just lead with unsolicited advice. If they throw something at you and you say, here's what you should do, I think we're a little bit less likely to be receptive. And I'll just say, further injecting a bit of my own personal vulnerability into this episode, as I promised, that this is something I've witnessed with my father. I've witnessed him go through this really beautifully in the past few years. Our family has experienced some personal trauma within our family. And this was not a man. My father was not a man who ever led with vulnerability or curiosity or openness for his first 68 years on this earth. But he has slowly worked that muscle, atrophied muscle as it might have been, and it has grown over the course of the past few years to the point that he is now more curious and open than I ever would have imagined he could be now in his 70s. It's really kind of miraculous, and it's inspirational to realize it's never too late to make these kind of changes for yourself. I don't think that curiosity was something that was modeled for him. I think he was more of a shaper, if we're using that of I want to be the shaper rather than the question asker. And, whatever combination of our family trauma and then grandfatherhood has somehow allowed him to reflect and open up and evolve. And it's been really beautiful to watch. I was thinking about him as Elle Morgan was talking about her mom and some of the questions she still has, and thinking about all of the things that I likely won't fully understand about my own adult child down the line. But all we can do is our best. And with that, another episode of Mapping the College Audition, produced by the best, Meghan Cordier and Kelly Prendergast, with social media artistry by Jordan Rice. You can get all of that on Instagram at Mapping the College Audition, as well as subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast. Rate and review us if you dare. You can even comment on podcast episodes if you watch and listen on Spotify or YouTube. My God, what a brave new world it is. And the place is MTCA.com. That's MTCA.com if you want to check out MTCA and what we can do to help you with your individual college prep journeys. To my young artists out there mapping their journeys, trust that you are enough exactly as you are. Now keep striving and keep staying curious. We'll catch you next week.